or no, or both, don't always have that that identification in the immediate aftermath to lean on as a form of immediate response and coping. So a catatonic state, it can happen with anyone. It can happen in any situation. It's certainly not. Does not only happen if you've experienced one type of rip. Every person responds differently. The body responds differently. But generally speaking, that catatonic state comes from shock. So it can come from shock. It can come from ambiguity. So not really knowing or understanding if you were incapacitated or passed out, and you wake up and you realize that you've been violated. That can be extremely shocking. The more shock factor and the more ambiguity that exists in these situations, the more likely you are to wind up in a catatonic state immediately, either immediately following the incident, or it might be 1 year, 2 years later down the line when you eventually process the incident. But it's certainly a response system to needing to go in. It's needing to go inside and needing to be with oneself to identify what the hell just happened. So sometimes that happens the next day or the next morning or right after the incident, and sometimes it doesn't happen with those more ambiguous situations. A lot of women, men, but particularly women in the Me Too movement last year, were coming into a sort of state of catatonic shock because, the people were writing from their beds. Maybe they took off work or had to not engage sexually with their husbands, or, they even if it was not as major as you might think about a person needing to go into the mental hospital, women and men are existing every day with their bodies almost in a state of catatonic shock, going through the motions. So it is on that zigzag. It is. It's on the zigzag. It's just that lower point on the zigzag can sometimes flatten out, just like you said. You're thinking about it like that. But unfortunately, and this is the part of the discussion that no one's really talking about, is that a lot of these victims of sex crimes, being women, and specifically being women of color, are people that don't necessarily have the luxury of being in a state of catatonic shock. They have no choice but to figure out a way. They have to find a way to go to work the next day because they've got a crying baby at home.
Ooh.
So what we're not talking about here when we talk about rape is like, well, why didn't you report it? Well, did I want to feed my child that day or feed myself that day? Or did I have the energy to go down to the police station? It's that serious. Does that answer your question?
Can I say something? Because
hi, Marcy. Yes, can you just speak a little louder because I can't hear you?
Okay. I remember watching with my dad Oprah Winfrey show when they had all men that were as children were assaulted in one way or another, either by family friends or the church, the priest, whatever, and or just pedophiles, because I know my dad was one of those at-risk youth because he was without a father. And and he was just frozen in there. And there's a lot of, disconnect with men. And I think a lot of the the distance that men have sometimes is related to this. Because he related that there was a pedophile in his neighborhood. And my dad was, so we're talking the 1930s. We're not talking about last week. That would have the kids over, the young boys over, to drink and play cards, but my dad was still like saying, but I never did any of that. But the look on his face was like, okay. But I knew that everybody in his group, all his friends, had some kind of either drinking problem, abusing their own families, all signs that they were there. So the idea that my dad wasn't there but he knew about it was probably not true. But in his head, he was never there and he doesn't know anything about that. And for him to even have that kind of reaction was kind of moving to me. So there's a lot of reasons, because we always come back to the female, but there's a lot of reasons for all of us to see that anytime, we feel we're betrayed or we feel like somebody has hurt us and taken advantage of us, and that our feelings didn't matter and we had nowhere to go to, I think we need to open it more. That yes, we all are hurting in some way. I'm sorry. I'm done.
I 100% agree. Thank you for sharing that. Actually, you bring up an excellent observation, and that observation that we are all hurting somehow, and essentially that we're all seeking to be heard and validated and listened to, is really critical to this discussion. Now, the reason I am focusing this conversation on women is not because I believe that this is not happening to men. It's not because I believe that what's happening to men and the way that we socialize men is not important. It is simply because my experiences and my research expertise is mostly around trauma for women. But what I will say is that what I have found is that ultimately this entire conversation can be whittled down to two words. We talk a lot about the force, there being only two driving forces in this world, love and fear. And I actually am working on a sort of research project about understanding two other driving forces, which may be stemming from love and fear, or may be love and fear in a different form. But I see it as connection versus power. Connection versus power. So we live in a society that teaches us to become more powerful and power over others. But really what we're trying to seek, what we are seeking when we search for power, is we're searching for connection. And we believe that by making enough money, we can buy connection, or we can impress people enough to win their connection, or we can become powerful enough to take connection where we can't get it elsewhere. And so I believe, really and truly, that the antidote to rape culture is a culture of connection. And I think that is completely gender neutral and non-heteronormative. And I'm going to get there more in segment 4. We're going to keep segment 3 really quick. But before I move on to segment 3, does anyone have any more questions about rape trauma syndrome? I did a really brief overview of it. You can Google it. It's on the internet. I've read a lot of research that's not on the internet to sort of pad my understanding, but you can do a quick search and understand the stages of coping a little bit better and how they mirror the stages of grief. Does anyone else have any questions about that, the aftermath, and what a victim or a survivor is really experiencing in the brain?
Am I on?
Go ahead.
Jenny, too. First, related to what you just said with power, what about the dominance where people just simply want dominance? They're not necessarily looking for contact. I mean, is it
we are gonna address that when I get to BDSM.
Oh, okay. And then let's see. The other was, I lost it. I'll come back to it. Sorry, I'll come back to it.
That's okay. You want to take a moment? You got it?
Tied in. It wasn't about the power structure. It'll come back to me. Don't worry about it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to segment 3, and we're going to keep segment 3 super short. I'm going to try not to go above 7 minutes. Do we need to take a commercial break soon?
No, we're good.
We're good? Okay. Okay, so the legal spectrum of sexual assault. So this really, I probably should have, I didn't order this in the best order, so I want to say thank you to everyone who's listening for bearing with me, since this is my very first live radio show. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, other Josh. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Alan, Dave, for all tuning in and bearing with me. But the legal spectrum of sexual assault, I really could have piggybacked on the definitions, because this is what's just so crazy to me, okay? One act of sexual violence in one state is not the same. It's not punishable. It's not the same offense if you cross the border. So I found this out through lived experience, okay? I reported a rape in New York, and I reported a rape, here's the first thing, going back to the false allegations, right? I reported a rape in New York, and then I reported a rape in New Jersey. And I came to find out, after being given the definitions, that the rape I reported in New York was rape in the 3rd degree, and the rape I reported in New Jersey was not actually even considered rape, even though there was penetration, because there were other defining features that were not met, features of their construction that were not met. So that it was sexual assault in the 2nd degree. It was really interesting for me to look at these, definitions and say, okay, what else? What are the other defining features of rape and sexual violence that decide what offense a person is going to be charged with if you decide to report? And what I found was, other than penetration, they also look at, we talked a little bit about ability to consent, right? So obviously consent is a defining feature. That, just to reiterate one more time, it's age of consent. It is ability, so you're not incapacitated by drugs or alcohol. It is that you're not incapacitated by mental or developmental disability. And it also includes threat of violence, either verbal coercion or actual harm or use of a weapon. So those different sort of elements matter when you are figuring out what crime has been perpetrated. So, for example, rape in the first degree in New York State requires a weapon. So my assault was considered rape in the third degree because no weapon was present. In some, in other states, there's a difference of was verbal coercion used or not. So the fact that in New Jersey, because there was no weapon, it actually lowered it to not being rape at all. So since no weapon was present or no threat of harm, I don't know if it was weapon, no immediate threat of harm besides the person. I mean, to me, it's a little laughable, right? This man, penetrating me without consent is very harmful. But because there was no weapon or he did not physically hit me, it did not rise to the level of rape to New Jersey standards. So if I had said publicly, interestingly enough, okay, this is just a scenario I want to go over. Interestingly enough, if I had said, so-and-so, let's say I post on social media, so-and-so raped me, just warning you, don't date him, I would actually have been liable for slander because that would have been a false allegation, even though he did penetrate me without my consent, because it did not rise to the level of rape in the first degree.
Wow. So you become the victim of your own crime.
Right.
I mean, it's double. Oh man.
Right. So oftentimes when we talk about false allegations, guys, we are not even considering the spectrum of offense. And it is, as women, I keep saying as women, as victims, and I don't even like as victims either, as people who have a lived experience of sexual violence, we are struggling to find our voice to tell the story, to speak up. But we are not given the legal language. We're not given the toolkit. We're not given the dictionary. And if we don't follow the dictionary, we could be liable for a crime. So I think that that's very important for anyone listening to understand that it's really like I had to just really sit with myself for, a while when I found that out, that, wow, I have been going around saying that this man raped me, and in my eyes, he did rape me. But in the eyes of the law, he sexually assaulted me. So if I continue to say that he raped me, I will be guilty of a crime. So I just want you guys to sit with that for a minute. Furthermore, I also wanted to just talk about New York State because that's so New York and New Jersey is where I have the most experience, and I think that that's where most of our callers are located. So I'm going to just run with that for a minute. In Manhattan, there is only one sex crimes unit for the entire borough of Manhattan. One. Even though we know that sexual violence is one of the most frequently committed crimes. And the resources that are devoted to sex crimes, again, completely vary from state to state. It is a separate unit, just like you watch Law and Order SVU, or maybe you do, maybe you don't. I do. It's it's not exactly like that, but it is kind of like that. There is a separate unit devoted to sex crimes. So I think that in terms of advocacy and where we want the movement to go on a political level, one of the things that we can do is demand that our congressmen and our local politicians redirect funding to investigation units for sex crimes.
I'm still following the fact that there's only one unit for New York. I mean, do they have at least a staff of several hundred or thousand people? I mean,
no, it was like maybe 15 desks, and there were only 2 people there when I got there.
For that population. Oh, no wonder why things go underreported. They can't even report.
Well, yeah, I went to my local precinct, and they stuffed me in the back of a cop car and drove me all the way up to, I think it was Harlem, somewhere in the 100s. And they said that was the, that there's one for each borough. So I guess there's one in Brooklyn, one for each borough.
Should be one in each precinct.
Right. When I thought this to myself, oh my God, this is taking me 5 hours just to report this. This is crazy. Like, I have to take off work. I was like, I can't afford. So who is really? One of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, who can afford to speak up?
Well, you're being victimized twice. Victimized because of the action, and victimized because you can't really authentically report it in an efficient manner.
Right. So we're at 10:23, and I know we probably have another break at some point, but I think we're going to be okay on time if we open this segment up real quick to any other questions about that, and then move on to our last segment.
Okay, the floor is open to questions.
So really the only thing you can do is say, I was attacked by so-and-so, but you can't say how or what, because you might be liable. But it is valid.
Well, when you're reporting to the police, you can say it however you want, because the police are the agents that are supposed to take your statement. So you're not necessarily damaging someone's reputation, let's say, by reporting it to the people whose job it is to report it to. I'm saying that if you're walking around talking about it, to anyone else, you
have to watch your wording, right?
And you could. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I don't know that anyone is going to come necessarily call you out on that, but what I am saying is that when we talk about false allegations, and making a false criminal allegation is a punishable crime as well. So when we talk about false allegations, the system sets victims of sexual violence up to fail.
Okay.
Because we are not first of all, the difference between states makes it, something that happened to you in one state is a crime here, and it's not a crime there. It's a crime there, and it's not a crime there. Additionally, because there are certain degrees, having a spectrum, I believe that it's important to have a spectrum. I think in that way, the law is becoming more progressive to have a spectrum of sexual assault and rape. Sense to me. But if we are not, as citizens, if we are not informed about that, then we are not being given the proper tools to define our experience in a way that could help us seek justice. Now, as we move on to the fourth section, we're going to talk about how we might not always want to use the legal system to define our experience or to seek justice. But I wanted to keep that option open for those people who feel that that is the path of healing for them. Make sense?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
On to segment 4.
On to segment 4. Oh, so this is a little bit more of a, I guess, interesting / fun part of the discussion. Healthy peer intimacy and the future of the sex-positive movement. I wish I had you guys in front of me because I would say, and you can do it at home, but raise your hand if you would consider yourself a part of the sex-positive movement. Hopefully you know what it is. It's pretty simple. It's very self-explanatory. It just means that you have decided that it is not taboo to talk about sex, that it is important to talk about sex, that sex and sexuality and sensuality and love are things that need to be discussed in the public sphere as well as the private sphere, that, require some type of education, that should not be shamed, that are a natural part of the human evolution and, system of connection. It just means that sex is not bad, that we should not be shaming people for consensual, healthy sexual activity, that we should not be shaming people for for sexual desires, for their sexual desires, whatever they may be. So as we know, there's a difference between desire and behavior. So part of this episode and part of my lens when I'm approaching this conversation about rape trauma and about sexual violence and about the future of the sex-positive movement is that desire and behavior are not the same. They're not the same thing. Psychology will show us that with anything, we are stimulated by external forces in our environment. Our brain then responds to those forces, and then we behave. So it's sort of a three, and then people react, and we create feedback loops. So there's sort of a system that works in terms of stimulation, desire, behavior. Stimulation, desire, behavior. And that means it's very lucky for us that it means that there are various points in the orbit for us to approach transformation. We can approach transformation. So here's an example. When people blame women for the way that they dress, you're dressing too provocatively, so it turned me on, and I had no choice but to force myself onto you. What they are saying is that what they're really saying there, if we want to, because they can't remove the blame statement, we're going to remove it for them. Well, what they're really saying is, I desire not to be overstimulated because I am afraid that I will react in a way that is, that is inappropriate. Similarly, we can sort of approach it past the phase of stimulation and say, okay, so let's say you do get stimulated. You get sexually aroused by seeing a woman in yoga pants, even though she's not doing anything sexual. What do you do with that desire? There's a lot of options there. From, I swallow it, I distract myself with my breath, and I continue my yoga practice, and I meditate until I'm only listening to my instructor and feeling the mat. right? That's one way. The next thing is that I'm unable to help myself. I can't stop staring at her, but I decide to look away. I look away. The next level would be I can't help myself, but to move my mat closer and talk to her after class, and and so on and so forth until it's, I grabbed her arm without asking, or I gave her a hug, or I invited her back to my place, and I just couldn't help myself. I started touching her without her consent. There's a huge range of behaviors that exist after one experiences desire. So there are various entry points that we need to look at if we want to change rape culture. We need to look at where are we being overstimulated? How do we change how we're reacting to the stimuli that are being put in front of us? And then, finally is how do we really develop that feedback loop with the other person? So that conversation about, is this okay for you? How are you feeling? Let's check in. Are you okay that, are you okay with me giving you a hug? Are you okay with coming back to my place? So not shaming the initial desire is really important. And it even goes, in a lot of healing groups for pedophilia, even, they do not shame the desires of the of the pedophiles. They work with them to curb their behaviors. So that's one really important thing about sort of ways that we can get into the culture, is the difference between the psyche and the behavior. So if we take that a step further and we think about, because I just gave a couple of adult scenarios, so I want to rewind back to childhood, okay? And we are thinking about what are children being stimulated with in school. Well, in school, at home, on the playground, wherever, they get into middle school, they get into high school, what are the narratives that we're telling them as they're being stimulated by porn on the internet, as they're being stimulated by half-naked men and women on billboards all over New York City? What is the narrative that we're giving them right now? And the answer right now is basically nothing. We only have 22 states out of 50. 22 out of 50 give any sex education. And of those 22 states, none of them talk about consent. Not one.
Whoa.
So that's a really important stat to understand. Granted, I will say that I got those statistics in 2015, so I'm a little behind. So it's possible that those have changed, but I'm sure they haven't changed very drastically. And ultimately, the issue is that we are creating a culture where young women and men are being exposed to a lot of stimulation and not being given the tools, the toolkits with how to deal with that. And at the same time, where we have sort of a gendered component to that. So that's the overarching umbrella, is we're giving lots of stimulation and no toolkits of how to handle it. Then you have to look at it in a gendered way. How are we teaching young boys? How are we teaching young girls? So under the umbrella of lots of stimulation with no way to deal with it is the sort of toxic masculinity issue on one hand, which is, in a nutshell, I encourage you to watch The Mask You Live In. It's a documentary about the way we educate young men. And it basically talks about the components of toxic masculinity and rape culture, which stem from a lack of emotional sensitivity, a lack of creating safe spaces for young boys to get out their feelings. And so without safe spaces to explore their feelings and emotions, they can either become extremely repressed or extremely aggressive. Repressed or aggressive. And in adulthood, that turns into two different sort of archetypes of the male rapist. One is the overtly aggressive, overtly misogynist, power-hungry dominator, and the other is the sort of shy, could be seen as, I don't want to say sociopathic, that's strong, but like could be seen as introverted, shy, the nice guy, feels like he's been dealt an unfair hand by not getting, the pretty woman in the end, unsure, not able to talk to women, and ends up sort of flipping the script on that by using coercion and force to get what he wants. So, and then there's a third category, and again, just to reiterate, I understand that I'm talking mostly about men to women, but it's not because I believe that sexual violence against men is unimportant or not happening. It's just not my expertise. The third archetype is something that's emerging now. We're seeing more and more with the Me Too movement, which is, the man who feels he's genuinely innocent, right? So the man that didn't know it was rape because we didn't understand what consent looked like, sounded like, felt like. And so they're reading these posts and they're scrolling through their memory thinking, oh my God, did I do that this time? Did I do that time? Was I ever? How do I know? Maybe, did I ask? Did I ask every single time? How could I have been sure? And, that sort of reflection is very important and can also be really scary. It's scary as women, it's scary as men to say, oh my God, how do I really know? How do I really know that I got consent? And so what I will say is that the opposite of rape culture is nurturance culture. The way that we build a culture of consent is to start small. And I was talking to Dave and Alan about this at the beginning of the show. We start by asking consent for things that are not sexual or not necessarily sexual. We don't just barge into our friends' homes unless we've known them for 5 years and they've said that the door is always open to us, right? And that's sometimes okay. If someone says the door is always open to you unless I say no, that's a form of relational consent. But we don't jump there. We don't jump to the door is always open. We jump to, we start with a phone call like, hey, is it okay? Where are you at? What are you doing today? Can I, is it okay if I can come over? And when you get there, you still ring the doorbell. It's the same with sex. So it starts with asking, hey, is it okay if I give you a hug? Is it okay? Do you mind being kissed on the cheek? Are you interested in a massage? It starts with these sort of more platonic gestures that then roll into a dialogue that makes consent the norm. And, I was talking to a coworker of mine and about kickboxing, and maybe he's listening or maybe he's not, but I really wanted to go kickboxing, and he was like not ready to go, not into it, whatever. And I was like, I found myself being a little bit coercive and being like, come on, whatever, it's just kickboxing, it's no big deal. And then I dialed back and I realized, wow, these are the ways that we make it okay, that we make it not okay for people to say no. So creating a consent culture is by nurturing the idea that it's okay to say no, being nurturing to someone's sensitivity to wherever they're at emotionally, tuning in, connecting, having the conversations, and creating safe spaces for people to say no way before you get to sex, so that when you get to sex, you know that you've already established a rapport that is that's comfortable for both parties involved. Questions so far?
Not so much a question, but a statement, but just being okay with hearing the other person say no and knowing that no means no, not no means yes, maybe later.
Yes. Does anyone else want to chime in and give a small example or echo a sentiment?
I'm thinking. Like
okay, well, I'm going to go into the last. Oh, go ahead.
Just a question. Okay.
No, go.
I know a lot of people, because this is kind of like what Dave asked before about aggression. How do you know when, somebody, I think the word you used was dominating, where someone just tries to take control of what you're doing. I'm interpreting for him. I don't know if that's what he meant. But I find a lot of people that have been abused have a tendency to also slightly abuse others, in that they may want to control the situation. And so they just kind of are very aggressive. I don't know how to explain it.
You're explaining it great, and it
okay.
ties in perfectly.
They'll tell you what you have to do because, they're used, you're used to being in controlling situations. And the thing about that is that control is not the same as being in your power, of understanding that, you are powerful, so you don't have to control what the other person is doing. They should be able to, you should just grab them and say, okay, take me over here, or do this, or do that. And that's how a lot of dysfunctional relationships are, in which each one tries to control the other, so it's not a free and easy situation. It's not a free and easy relationship, because you're not really caring about what the other really wants to do or be, or how they're feeling at the moment, whether they will. And I think that's about. I don't know how to wrap this up, but.
Well, I'm going to say thank you for saying it very bluntly, which is that, hurt people hurt people. People who have been abused often abuse other people. I know this better than anyone, and that's why the very last part of this conversation is around polyamory and BDSM, because what I have found that was really hard for me was when I recognized how deeply traumatized I was and how much my abuse was seeping onto my other partners. And I felt lost. I felt really lost and confused, because I understood cognitively that I was engaging in toxic relationships, either seeking out abusive partners or in turn becoming abusive, or some combination of toxicity, you know, relational toxicity that happens. And this is a multi-generational phenomenon too, right? So when there's toxicity in any part of the family dynamic, or the partner dynamic, the sexual dynamic, it tends to, A, become multi-generational, and B, become replicated until it's healed. So you might see failed partnership after failed partnership after failed partnership. But talking about the sex-positive movement, what that really means, it really, really means taking away the shame to such a degree that should two consenting adults decide together that kind of power exchange and control creates an environment of healing and safety, that we know how to have those conversations about dominance. Because what I've come to realize as someone who studies relationships and love and sex and rape is that, you know, in this whole conversation about consent culture, there is something to be said for the healing aspect of passionate, aggressive, playful, sexual bonding. And there is a certain level of fear, I think, that people are going to lose the passion, and they're going to lose the catharsis that comes from a mind-blowing orgasm, which often can come from a very fine line border between pleasure and pain. And so there's this unspoken fear around consent culture, because we are getting something. The question becomes, what are we sacrificing? What are we, we find there's a reason why this culture is sustaining itself, why a rape culture is sustaining itself. And it's sustaining itself because there's a certain level of stress and anxiety that is infiltrating our population, be it technology, be it the long work hours, people are turning to substances or sex for catharsis, for a cathartic release. And aggression is such an integral part of that. Dominating someone else can be such an integral part of healing that we can be reluctant to make sure, to take the right steps to ensure that it is consensual, because it sort of becomes a survival mechanism where it is that do or die that you get your release. And so what I am a huge proponent of is very taboo, right, is really creating safe spaces for people who have an interest in power exchange to do it safely and consensually. And Jessica Valenti, who's a pretty renowned feminist author, writes about this. She wrote a mind-blowing article about BDSM being the opposite of rape culture, and talking about how even in feminist circles right now, a lot of women are being shamed for their desire to be dominated. Because if you desire to be dominated, then you're contributing to, the narrative is, well, are you contributing to a rape culture? Because you are saying you want it, and so how it's a really fine line, actually, to be able to develop the connection and the strength of connection and intimacy that it takes to allow your partner that element of control, for you to either be submissive or to trust your partner so much that you can, swap roles and go to extremes. Because what happens with a consent culture is we're creating a sort of baseline standard of building trust, between cordial acquaintances and, intimate partners that can then be built upon to explore each other more intimately in a way that does not scar you. Because it's sort of like, going on a roller coaster. If you're with your mom and your brothers and sisters and they force you on the roller coaster the year before you're ready, you might never want to go on roller coasters again. Because but the problem wasn't the roller coaster. The problem was the forcing.
Yeah.
So, however, if you know yourself, when we start, teaching a culture where we really are in tune with ourselves and being connected, and someone maybe went on a roller coaster once and goes with a group of people and says, I know that I'm going to get a little nervous when I get up there, but I want you to take me on the roller coaster. I'm like an advanced directive for help. I want you to take me on the roller coaster, even if I say no. Only if I say safe word, then don't take me. But if I say no, push me. Encourage me to go. That's what we want our friends to do. Good friends, good lovers, good partners do push boundaries, but they do it in a way that trust has already been established and that it's safe and that the pushing itself is consensual.
I like the way you use the choice safe words that you should know with your partner, and then you also have the word for this is too much. I'm not, and you have to make some boundary choices. Even if that's kind of the hard thing is how do you know when pushing too much because you want to be pushed but you don't want to be pushed? Now, when do you say? How do you change from safe words to back to no?
Well, for me, so when I say safe words, I broadly that's a broad brushstroke of terms you can create with your partner for, slow down or no. But okay. I actually was considering starting a project. I just get these crazy ideas. I was considering starting a project called the Safe Word Project, where we just replaced no with safe word. And so, because I think that one of the issues here is that, again, we are taught as a society that no means yes, and it's not just with sex. It means if you didn't get into the first college, try harder. Call the dean. If you didn't if that audition didn't go well for you, contact the casting director. Try harder. Don't take no for an answer.
I was taught as a salesperson, no means not ready yet. So then you find out when they're going to be ready, and you use other words to find out when you're going to close the sale.
Well, yes, that's very interesting because that's exactly what I've gotten when I've, been in bed with a guy and I have said no, and then it's like 15 minutes later, they try again.
When are you going to close the sale?
Are you ready now? It's an interesting approach because it works. But then you leave it, sometimes you leave feeling like, did I really want to buy that product? And then it becomes really, as a woman, I'm like, did I consent? I don't know. I've gone through my Rolodex of partners, one by one, and been like, was that consensual? Was that consensual? Was that consensual? And ultimately, I've been able to sort of figure it out. But I personally feel that we have a major issue where outside of the realm of sex, no does not mean no in America. So we need another word. So my idea for the Safe Word Project was if you're being assaulted, say safe words and make this a thing where you really, and then, if it comes to prosecution and they ask very clearly, did you say safe word? Then
can you give one or two examples
of saying safe words?
Yeah.
I mean, sure. Like, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward, but I guess if I was, had gone back to someone's place after a date and, you know, we were in bed together and we were making out and that was fine, and maybe I was receiving some oral sex and that was fine, and I was giving oral sex and that was fine, and then he asked me if I wanted to have sex. I said yes, let's use protection. So we're having sex with protection, and then all of a sudden, you know, things start to get a little rough. He starts pulling my hair. I didn't say that he could pull my hair. Okay, I go with it for a little bit. He starts pulling my hair harder. I scream, maybe not scream, I say safe word. And that means stop.
Gotcha. I was thinking more of bringing somebody home and said, I will share a bed with you, we can kiss, but that's it. Because I've had that happen, and I'm fine with that because it was defined from the get-go, and I didn't push it. I didn't.
Oh, hi guys.
I trust that
we gotta.
Ahead,
safe
Alan.
word. We gotta pull the plug on this. So Jenny, why don't you just give a summary, please?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say once again, thank you, Alan, Emerging Forest, Spiritual Unity Radio Network, Dave Miller, thank you, Marcy, Josh, anyone who is listening in, thank you for supporting me, for joining me and listening to this taboo topic. I would love to dive deeper into some of these intricacies and nuances because that's where the real learning happens. But I appreciate your patience as we zoomed through. I know we packed a lot in there today. So thank you for listening and allowing me to take the floor to just guide us with a sort of framework within which we can continue the conversation about the Me Too movement and specifically about the psychological component of forming a safe, consensual culture.
Thanks so much, Jenny. We're pushing the limits here. My name is Alan Ritter. Have a great week. See you next week. Good night.
Thanks for listening to the Spiritual Unity Radio Network. Join us 7 nights a week for exciting programming covering a variety of expressions of faith. And remember, all manifestations of the divine are equally valid.